There's something I need to tell you before we go any further. What brought you here today, whether it was the title, a recommendation, or just something you can't quite explain, I don't think that was an accident. I really don't. And I know how that sounds. I know some of you are already a little skeptical, maybe even a little tired of people saying things like that. I understand. So am I, sometimes. But stay with me for just a moment. Because there are days, and maybe you've had one recently, where something shifts. Where you wake up and the world feels a little too heavy and a little too quiet at the same time. Where you're going through the motions, doing everything you're supposed to do, and still, something inside you is waiting. Listening. Almost like a part of you knows something is coming, but you don't know what. That feeling. It's not anxiety. It's not age. It's not loneliness, though it can look like all three. That feeling has a name. And today, we're going to talk about it. Because someone, something, whispered yours. I want you to think about the last time you felt truly seen. Not complimented. Not praised. Not told you did a good job or that you looked nice. I mean truly seen, the way someone looks at you and somehow knows what's happening inside you before you've said a single word. That kind of seen. For most of us, those moments are rare. And the older we get, the rarer they become. Life fills up with responsibilities, with noise, with the kind of busyness that feels productive but leaves you empty at the end of the day. You pour yourself into your work, your family, your community, and somewhere in all of that pouring, you lose track of what's left inside the cup. And then one day, you're sitting somewhere quiet. Maybe it's early morning before anyone else is awake, maybe it's late at night when the house finally settles, and you feel it. That stillness. That ache. That gentle, almost unbearable sense that you were made for something more than this. Not more money. Not more success. Something deeper. Something that doesn't have a clean name in any language you know. I've talked to women in their 60s who described that feeling as homesickness, except they were sitting in the home they'd lived in for 30 years. I've talked to men in their 40s who called it emptiness, but their lives, by every measurable standard, were full. And I've talked to people in their 20s and 30s who said they couldn't explain it at all. Just a pull. A whisper. A sense that something or someone was trying to get their attention. And here's what I've come to believe, after years of sitting with that question myself, that feeling is not a malfunction. It is not depression, though it can walk alongside it. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is, in fact, the most honest thing about you. Because the part of you that aches for something beyond the visible world, that part is awake. And something is trying to reach it. There's an old idea, one that runs through nearly every spiritual tradition humanity has ever known, that we are not just bodies moving through time. That there is a dimension of our existence that exists outside of the physical, something older than our birth and quieter than our thoughts. And that this dimension is not separate from our daily lives. It is woven into them. Into the moments we almost miss. Into the conversations that changed everything. Into the losses that broke us open in ways that, years later, we understood were actually breaking us free. Angels, and I use that word carefully, not as a fairy tale but as the oldest human language for something real, angels are not the winged creatures of greeting cards. They are not soft and decorative. Every ancient account of an angelic encounter begins the same way, almost without exception, with the angel saying, "Do not be afraid." Which tells you something important. It tells you that whatever these presences are, they are not small. They are not gentle in the way we use that word today. They are powerful. And they show up at the precise moments when human beings are at their most vulnerable, their most lost, their most open. And vulnerability, it turns out, is not a weakness. It is a frequency. It is the state in which we become receivable. Think about the moments in your own life when you were the most undone. When the plan fell apart. When the person left. When the diagnosis came. When you sat in that parking lot and couldn't make yourself go inside because you didn't know how to keep pretending everything was fine. Those moments felt like the worst of your life. And maybe some of them were. But I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. What came through in those moments? Not what you lost. Not what broke. But what came through. What arrived that you weren't expecting. A phone call at exactly the right time. A stranger who said something that landed like it was written specifically for you. A dream that stayed with you for days. A sentence in a book that made you put it down and just breathe. A feeling, sudden and inexplicable, that you were not alone. Those are not coincidences. Or rather, let me say it this way. The word coincidence is just the word we use when we haven't yet found the courage to call something what it actually is. Something has been trying to reach you. For a long time, maybe. Through the noise and the busyness and the grief and the ordinary Tuesdays. Through all of it. And it knows your name. I want to tell you something that took me a long time to understand. We spend so much of our lives waiting for the dramatic moment. The burning bush. The parted sea. The undeniable sign written across the sky in letters so clear that even the most skeptical part of us would have to stop and say, yes. That is real. We wait for the moment that removes all doubt, all ambiguity, all the quiet wondering that lives in the back of our minds like a tenant we've never quite managed to evict. And while we're waiting for the dramatic, we miss the continuous. Because here's what I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed it too, if you've been paying a certain kind of attention, the sacred rarely announces itself. It doesn't come with a soundtrack. It doesn't schedule an appointment. It arrives in the spaces between things. In the pause between one breath and the next. In the way the light falls through a window at a particular hour and makes an ordinary room look, just for a moment, like somewhere holy. There's a story I return to often. Not because it's dramatic, it isn't, but because it's honest in a way that most spiritual stories aren't. It's the story of a prophet sitting in a cave, exhausted and broken, convinced that everything he had given his life to had been for nothing. And God, or whatever word you use for the force that holds all things together, comes to him. But not in the earthquake. Not in the fire. Not in the wind that tears the mountains apart. In what the oldest translations call a still, small voice. Other versions say a gentle whisper. One scholar I read described it as the sound of sheer silence. The sound of sheer silence. I've thought about that phrase for years. Because silence has no sound. And yet somehow, that description is exactly right. There is a quality of silence, a particular kind of quiet, that is not empty. That is, in fact, so full that it presses against you. That makes you feel, without being able to explain why, that something is present. That you are not alone in the room, even when you are. That is the frequency at which angels operate. Not in the spectacular. In the subtle. In the moment between sleep and waking when a thought arrives that is too clear, too specific, too perfectly timed to have come from the ordinary workings of your own mind. In the song that comes on the radio at the exact moment you needed those particular words. In the feeling, sudden and certain, that you should call someone, and you do, and they answer crying, and they say I was just thinking about you and I needed to hear a voice. These things happen to people every day. And every day, people talk themselves out of them. Because we've been trained, all of us, in one way or another, to distrust what can't be measured. To be embarrassed by mystery. To keep our spiritual experiences private, whispered, hedged with disclaimers. I know this sounds strange, but I don't know if I believe in this kind of thing, but maybe it was just a coincidence, but that word, that small, three-letter word that we use to protect ourselves from the full weight of what we actually experienced. I want to invite you, just for the length of this conversation, to take the but away. Not permanently. Not as a theological commitment or a declaration of belief. Just as an experiment. Just to see what happens when you let the experience be what it was, without immediately reaching for the explanation that makes it smaller. Because here's what I know about explanation. It satisfies the mind. But the mind is not the only thing that needs to be fed. There is a part of you, and you know the part I'm talking about, that doesn't live in your head. It lives somewhere closer to the center of your chest. And that part doesn't think in arguments. It thinks in knowing. It doesn't analyze. It recognizes. And what it recognizes, when it's quiet enough to hear, is this. You have never been as alone as you thought you were. Not once. Not even in your darkest moment. Not even when the silence felt like abandonment rather than presence. Especially not then. There's a reason that every culture on Earth, across every century of recorded history, has some version of the messenger. The intermediary. The being that exists between the human and the divine and carries something across that threshold. The details differ, the names, the appearances, the specific roles. But the core of the story is always the same. The unseen world is not indifferent to your life. It is, in fact, paying very close attention. And sometimes, not always, not on demand, not as a reward for being good enough or faithful enough or together enough. Sometimes it reaches through. The question is not whether it happens. The question is whether you are willing to recognize it when it does. And recognition, it turns out, is its own kind of faith. Not the faith of certainty. Not the faith of having all the answers. But the faith of the person who has been sitting in the dark long enough that their eyes have adjusted, and they can see, now, what was always there. Shapes in the darkness. Light that was too subtle to notice when everything else was bright. You've been in the dark before. Maybe you're there right now. And if you are, if that's exactly where you are today, then I need you to hear this next part very carefully. The dark is not the absence of light. It is the condition in which a certain kind of light becomes visible. The kind that doesn't compete. The kind that waits. The kind that has been there the whole time, patient and steady and unchanged, holding your name in a way that nothing in this world ever quite manages to hold it. Your full name. Every version of you. The one you show the world and the one you've never shown anyone. That name was whispered. And something carried it here, to this moment, to these words, to whatever is happening right now in the quietest part of you as you listen. That is not nothing. That is everything. Let me ask you something personal. And I mean that. Personal. Not rhetorical. Not the kind of question you're supposed to nod along to and then forget by the time the video ends. Have you ever prayed and felt like nothing came back? Not just once. I mean consistently. For a season. Maybe a long season. Where you said the words, or you tried to say them, because some days even the words wouldn't come, and the ceiling felt like a ceiling. Solid. Unmovable. And the silence on the other side felt less like peace and more like absence. Like you were speaking into a room where no one was home. I think more people have been in that place than will ever admit it out loud. Because there's a particular kind of shame that comes with spiritual silence. It's different from other kinds of loneliness. When relationships fail or careers collapse or health deteriorates, we allow ourselves to grieve openly. We have language for those losses. We have rituals and support systems and people who bring food and sit with us. But when God goes quiet, or when it feels like God has gone quiet, we go quiet too. Because who do you tell? How do you say, without sounding like you've lost your faith or your mind, that the thing you've built your inner life around suddenly feels very far away? That you're doing all the same things you've always done, praying, attending, serving, believing, and something that used to feel alive in it has gone still? You keep showing up. Because that's what you do. But the aliveness is gone. I've been there. I want you to know that. Not as a disclaimer, not as a strategy to seem relatable, but because it's true, and because I think it matters that you hear it from someone who came out the other side not with a triumphant testimony about how everything got better, but with something quieter. Something more durable. A different relationship with silence itself. Because here is what I learned in that season, slowly and not without resistance. Silence is not the same as absence. And the feeling of being unheard is not the same as being ignored. We are creatures of sensation. We trust what we can feel. And when the feeling of connection fades, when prayer stops feeling like conversation and starts feeling like leaving voicemails that no one returns, we interpret that as information. We think, something has changed. Something is wrong. I have done something to deserve this distance. Or worse, there was never anyone listening to begin with. But feelings, as honest as they are not always accurate maps of reality. Think about the way radio waves work. They are moving through the air around you right now, through the walls of whatever room you're in, through your body, through everything, and you cannot feel them. You cannot see them. If you had no receiver, no device tuned to the right frequency, you would have no evidence whatsoever that they existed. And yet they do. Constantly. Carrying voices and music and information through the invisible air, indifferent to whether you have a radio turned on or not. Prayer, I've come to think, works something like that. The signal does not stop because our receiver goes offline. The transmission continues. And sometimes, in the seasons when we feel the most disconnected, what is actually happening is not that heaven has gone silent. It is that something in us is being recalibrated, tuned, cleared of the static that accumulated without our noticing. Those seasons are brutal. I won't romanticize them. They feel like abandonment. They feel like punishment. They feel like standing at a window in the dark, watching a house across the street where the lights are on and people are warm and connected and you cannot find the door. That feeling is real. The pain of it is real. But so is what comes after. There's something that happens to a person who has been through genuine spiritual silence and come out the other side still standing. Something that cannot be manufactured by any amount of good teaching or enthusiastic worship or inspiring content. A rootedness. A quality of faith that has been tested all the way down to its foundations and found, at the bottom of the testing, that the foundation held. Not because everything made sense. Not because all the questions got answered. But because something remained. Something quiet and steady and unmistakably real, even when everything that felt real had been stripped away. The mystics called it the dark night of the soul. And I know that phrase has been used so many times it's almost lost its edge. But what they were describing was not a poetic metaphor. They were describing a specific, identifiable experience that spiritual seekers across centuries and traditions have moved through. An experience of radical interior emptiness that precedes a radical interior expansion. The night is dark because your eyes are adjusting. Because what you're about to see requires a different kind of vision than the one you've been using. And angels, those presences, those messengers, whatever language you need to use to hold the concept, they are particularly active in those dark nights. Not always in ways we recognize in the moment. Sometimes it's only years later that you look back and see the thread. The moment when someone said exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. The unexpected peace that arrived in the middle of a crisis and had no rational explanation. The dream that left you with a certainty you couldn't justify but couldn't shake either. They were there. Working in the register that was available. Given where you were, given what you could receive. And here is what I want you to hold on to, not as a comfort that papers over the pain, but as something solid to stand on when the ground feels uncertain. The silence was never punishment. The distance was never rejection. And the fact that you kept showing up, kept praying even when it felt hollow, kept believing even when belief felt like a discipline rather than a joy, that faithfulness was seen. Every single moment of it. Your name was not forgotten in the silence. If anything, it was being held more carefully than ever. Because the things we hold carefully, we hold quietly. And the things heaven holds most carefully are the ones who kept going when going was the hardest thing they'd ever done. You kept going. And something knows that. Something has been watching that with something I can only describe as a kind of love that has no human equivalent. Patient and complete and entirely undeterred by your doubt, your exhaustion, your very reasonable questions about whether any of this is real. It is real. You are real. And what has been reaching for you has been doing so with a precision and a tenderness that, if you could see it fully, would undo you completely. In the best possible way. I want to talk about the moments we almost miss. Not the big ones. The big ones we notice, the crisis, the miracle, the turning point we can point to later and say, that was when everything changed. Those moments announce themselves. They have a before and an after. They leave a mark. I'm talking about the small ones. The ones that happen in the margins of ordinary days. The ones that don't make it into the story we tell about our lives because they seem too quiet, too ordinary, too easily explained away. The ones that we file under coincidence or good timing or just the way things sometimes work out. Those are the ones I want to talk about. Because I think those are the ones that matter most. There's a woman I know, I won't use her name, but she'll recognize herself if she's listening, who went through a divorce in her late 50s that she described as the complete dismantling of everything she thought she was. Not just her marriage. Her identity. Her sense of what her life meant, what it had been building toward, who she was when no one was looking. All of it came apart at once. And she told me that during that time, she stopped praying. Not dramatically. Not as a declaration. She just stopped. Because she didn't know what to say anymore. Because every prayer she tried to form felt dishonest somehow, like she was performing a faith she wasn't sure she still had. And then one morning, an ordinary Tuesday, she said, which is its own kind of detail, she was sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold, and she heard, very clearly, not with her ears but with something deeper than her ears, 2 words. I'm here. That's all. No explanation. No comfort beyond the fact of the presence itself. No answer to any of the questions that had been tearing her apart for months. Just, I'm here. And she said that in that moment, something in her that had been clenched for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be unclenched, something let go. Not because the situation changed. The divorce was still happening. The grief was still real. The uncertainty about her future was still vast and unnavigable. None of that changed. But she knew she wasn't alone in it. And that knowing, that 2-word, inexplicable, undeniable knowing, carried her through the next 2 years in a way that nothing else could have. I'm here. 2 words. Whispered into the silence of an ordinary Tuesday morning to a woman sitting alone with cold coffee and a broken life. That is how it works. That is the scale at which the sacred operates, most of the time. Not in the spectacular. In the specific. In the perfectly timed, perfectly calibrated, perfectly personal moment that could not have been manufactured by your own mind because your own mind, in that moment, had nothing left to give. And I really think, that most of us have had at least one of those moments. Maybe more. Maybe many more than we've allowed ourselves to count. But we've been so thoroughly trained to explain things away, to be reasonable, to protect ourselves from the embarrassment of believing in something we can't prove, that we file those moments away in a drawer we never open. We call them strange. We call them comforting but probably coincidental. We tell ourselves that we were vulnerable and our mind was doing what minds do, finding patterns, creating comfort, filling in the blanks. And maybe sometimes that's true. I'm not asking you to abandon discernment. I'm not asking you to believe everything that feels meaningful is a message from heaven. But I'm asking you this: what if you've been wrong about some of them? What if, in your very reasonable effort not to be foolish or gullible or naive, you've talked yourself out of experiences that were genuinely real? What would it mean for your life, for the story you tell about your life, if some of those moments were exactly what they felt like? What if you really weren't alone? Here's something I've observed, quietly, over many years of paying attention to how people talk about their inner lives. The people who seem most at peace, not the loudest, not the most outwardly religious, not the ones with the most polished testimonies, but the ones who carry a genuine, lived, unperformable quality of peace, those people almost always have one thing in common. They have stopped fighting with the mystery. They have made a kind of truce with the unknown. Not ignorance. Not laziness. Not the giving up of careful thought. But a willingness to hold the questions without demanding that the questions resolve on a human timeline. They've learned to live in the space between the question and the answer. And they've discovered that that space, which looks from the outside like uncertainty, feels from the inside like something surprisingly close to freedom. Because when you stop needing to have it all figured out, something opens. When you release the exhausting grip of needing the universe to justify itself to you before you'll trust it, you suddenly have hands free for other things. For receiving. For noticing. For the kind of attention that makes the small moments visible. And the small moments, it turns out, are where most of the real living happens. I think about the disciples on the road to Emmaus, walking away from Jerusalem, away from everything that had just collapsed, talking to a stranger about their grief. And it's only later, when the stranger has gone, that they turn to each other and say, "Didn't our hearts burn within us while he talked with us on the road?" They didn't recognize the presence in the moment. They recognized it in retrospect. In the quality of feeling that the encounter left behind. In the way their hearts moved when they couldn't explain why. That is a form of recognition available to all of us. Not the lightning bolt certainty that we wish for, but the retrospective understanding, the looking back and seeing the shape of something that, in the moment, just felt like a conversation on a road. Your life is full of conversations on roads. Full of strangers who said the right thing. Full of moments when the timing was too precise to be accidental. Full of days that felt like nothing and were, in fact, everything. And woven through all of it, Through the grief and the joy and the ordinary Tuesdays and the sleepless nights and the moments of grace you almost talked yourself out of, woven through all of it is a thread you didn't put there. Someone else did. And they've been holding it the whole time. There's something that happens to a person when they finally stop running. Not running from anything dramatic, necessarily. I don't mean fleeing danger or avoiding consequences in any obvious way. I mean the subtler kind of running. The kind that looks, from the outside, like a full and productive life. The kind where you fill every hour with something useful, something necessary, something that justifies your existence in a way that feels safer than stillness. Because stillness is where the real questions live. And the real questions, the ones about who you are beneath all your roles and responsibilities, about what you actually believe when no one is watching, about whether the life you're living is the life you were made for, those questions are not always comfortable guests. So we keep moving. We keep doing. We keep the noise at a level that makes the quiet ones impossible to hear. And then something stops us. Sometimes it's chosen, a retreat, a sabbatical, a deliberate decision to slow down. But more often, in my experience, it's not chosen at all. It's illness. Job loss. The death of someone who held a particular place in the architecture of your life, and whose absence leaves a gap so specific that nothing else will ever quite fit it. It's the moment when the running simply becomes impossible. When the road ends and you have to stop, not because you wanted to, but because there's nowhere left to go. And in that stopping, in that forced, unwanted, terrifying stillness, something happens. The quiet that you've been avoiding turns out to be inhabited. I want to say that again because I think it's the most important thing I'll say today. The quiet that you've been avoiding, the stillness you've filled with noise and busyness and distraction for years, maybe decades, that quiet is not empty. It never was. You thought it was emptiness you were avoiding. But what you were actually avoiding was fullness. A fullness so complete, so total, so unlike anything the busy world offers, that it felt, at first encounter, indistinguishable from loss. That's the paradox at the center of every genuine spiritual life. The thing that looks like emptying is actually filling. The thing that feels like dying is actually the end of something smaller making room for something larger. The silence that feels like abandonment is, in fact, the most intimate form of presence, the presence that doesn't need words because it is beyond words, because it existed before language and will exist after, because it communicates not in sentences but in the sudden, inexplicable, unshakable knowing that arrives without warning and stays without permission. Angels carry that kind of presence. That's what I believe. Not as theology, not as doctrine, but as something lived and observed and impossible to fully articulate. They are carriers of a quality of awareness, a reminder, really, of what is actually real beneath the surface of what appears real. And their assignments are specific. Precise. They are not generically benevolent forces floating through the universe offering comfort to anyone who asks nicely enough. They are sent. With names. With purposes. With a particular person in mind. With your name in mind. And I want to talk about what it means to be named. Because I don't think we think about this enough. In the ancient world, in the world where most of our spiritual texts were written, a name was not just an identifier. It was not the label your parents chose from a book because they liked the sound of it. A name was a declaration of essence. It described what something fundamentally was. To know someone's name was to know something true and irreducible about them. To speak someone's name was an act of intimate recognition. When heaven speaks your name, it is not calling out a label. It is recognizing your essence. The thing that you are beneath every layer of performance and protection and persona. The you that existed before the world got to you and started telling you who to be. The you that will still exist when all the roles fall away, when you're no longer someone's parent or spouse or employee or caretaker, the one who remains when everything else is stripped down. That one. That essential, irreducible, completely unrepeatable self. That is the one whose name was whispered. And here is what I want you to sit with, really sit with, not rush past. If something that exists outside of time and beyond the limits of human perception knows your name, knows the real one, the deep one, the one you've maybe never heard spoken out loud, then you are not an accident. You are not a random arrangement of matter that briefly achieved consciousness before dissolving back into nothing. You are not expendable. You are not interchangeable. You are not the sum of your failures or your diagnoses or your disappointments or the ways other people have misunderstood or underestimated you. You are known. Specifically. Completely. Without condition. I know that can be hard to receive. I know that for some of you, the idea of being fully known is not comforting, it's terrifying. Because being fully known means being fully seen, and being fully seen means that all of it is visible. The parts you're proud of and the parts you've never told anyone. The ways you've fallen short of who you wanted to be. The quiet shames. The unspoken regrets. The prayers you prayed that you're embarrassed to remember now. All of it is seen. And here's the thing that took me the longest to understand and that I still have to remind myself of regularly, none of it changed the name. None of it altered the whisper. None of it made the presence withdraw or the attention diminish or the love, and yes, I'll use that word, love, none of it made the love conditional. Because the love that whispers your name is not the love that humans give each other, as beautiful and necessary as that love is. Human love is real and it is one of the most important things in this life. But it is also limited. It is also exhaustible. It also has conditions, even when we try our hardest to make it unconditional, because we are human and being human means being finite. The love behind the whisper is not finite. It does not run out when you run out. It does not grow impatient when your faith goes thin. It does not check a box somewhere that says you've used up your allocation of grace and now you need to earn more. It simply, and this is the word I keep coming back to, it simply continues. Through the silence and the noise. Through the faith and the doubt. Through the seasons when you felt its presence like warmth on your skin and the seasons when you felt nothing at all and kept going anyway. Through all of it. It simply continues. And so do you. Because you're still here. Because something brought you to this moment, this conversation, these words on this particular day. And that, too, is not nothing. That, too, has your name written on it. Before I go any further, and I mean this genuinely, not as a scripted pause, I want to say something directly to you. If you've been here with me this whole time, if you've listened this far, if something in these words has been landing in a place inside you that doesn't have a name yet, I want you to know that I see that. And I don't take it lightly. This channel exists because I believe that there are people who are hungry for conversations like this one. Not the loud ones. Not the ones that make big promises and leave you feeling temporarily excited and permanently unchanged. But the quiet ones. The ones that sit with you for a while and don't rush to the conclusion. The ones that treat you like an intelligent, feeling, complicated human being who deserves more than a slogan. If that's what you're looking for, and I think it is, because you're still here, then I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Not as a number. As a presence. As someone who shows up, day after day, for this kind of conversation. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and come back tomorrow. And the day after. Because what we're building here is not a content library. It is a community of people who are serious about their inner lives. And that community needs you in it. You belong here. I mean that. And now, come back with me, because there's something I haven't said yet. Something that might be the most important thing of all. We've talked about the whisper. We've talked about the presence. We've talked about the silence and the stillness and the way the sacred moves through ordinary moments in ways we almost always miss. But there's a question underneath all of that. A question that I think has been sitting in you since the beginning of this conversation, waiting for me to finally name it. The question is not whether you are seen. We've established that. The question is not whether you are loved or known or held or remembered. We've moved through all of that. The question, the real one, the one that keeps some of you awake at 3 a.m, is this: what do I do with it? What do I do with the knowing? What do I do with the whisper? What do I do with the fact that something or someone has been reaching for me, patiently and precisely and without condition, and I have been, through no fault of my own, through entirely understandable human fear and exhaustion and distraction, I have been, more or less, turned the other way? That question deserves a real answer. Not a simple one. Not a 5-step plan or a spiritual formula that promises results if you follow the instructions correctly. But a real one. The kind that takes seriously both the reality of what is reaching for you and the reality of what it means to be a human being trying to respond to something that exists on a frequency you can't always access. And here is where I want to start. Not at the beginning of a new practice or a new discipline, or a new commitment to doing better, but at the place where you actually are. Right now. Whatever that looks like. However far that feels from where you think you should be. Because here is what I have learned, slowly and imperfectly, over more years than I care to count. The response that heaven is waiting for is not the polished one. It is not the one you'll give once you've sorted yourself out, once you've resolved the doubts, once you've become the version of yourself that feels worthy of being in conversation with the divine. It is the one you can give right now. In this exact condition. With this exact amount of faith, which may be very little. With this exact amount of certainty, which may be none at all. With the grief still present and the questions still unanswered and the silence still recent enough to sting. The response that is wanted is the honest one. And honesty, raw, unpolished, unglamorous honesty, is something that the sacred has always known how to receive. Every tradition says so. Every ancient text, in its own language and its own metaphor, says the same thing: come as you are. Not as you wish you were. Not as you used to be. Not as you plan to become. As you are. Right now. In this moment. With everything that means. There is a kind of prayer that most of us were never taught. Not the formal kind, not the recited kind, not even the earnest and structured kind where you organize your thoughts into requests and gratitudes and confessions and close with amen. I'm talking about the kind that is less prayer and more conversation. Less performance and more presence. The kind where you simply, and I mean simply, with no technique required, turn in the direction of whatever you believe is there and say, out loud or in your heart, something true. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be coherent. Some of the most powerful prayers I've ever heard were barely sentences. Were fragments. Were just a name, said with everything the person had left. Just a name and the willingness to say it out loud. Because the willingness to turn, that's the thing. That is the whole thing, actually. Not the perfection of the turning. Not the eloquence of it. Not the theological precision of it. The turning itself. The decision, made in whatever condition you're in, to orient yourself toward what is reaching for you rather than away from it. That decision, made once, made imperfectly, made with shaking hands and a skeptical mind and a heart that has been hurt enough times to know better, that decision is received as an act of extraordinary courage. Because it is. Turning toward the invisible when the visible world has given you every reason to trust only what you can see and measure and control, that is not naivety. That is not weakness. That is one of the bravest things a human being can do. And the presence that has been whispering your name, that presence knows it. Knows the cost of what you're offering. Knows what it took to get you here. Knows every closed door and every unanswered prayer and every moment of doubt that preceded this one. And receives you anyway. Without reservation. Without conditions. Without making you explain yourself first or prove that you've earned the right to be received. Just, received. The way you receive someone you've been waiting for. The way you open the door before they finished knocking because you've been watching for them, because you knew they were coming, because you never stopped looking in the direction they'd arrive from. That is the welcome that is waiting for you. Not at the end of a long journey of self-improvement. Not after you've become more disciplined or more devout or more certain or more deserving. Right now. Today. In the exact shape of whoever you are in this moment. The door is already open. It has been open this whole time. You just have to be willing to walk through it. I want to leave you with something. Not a lesson. Not a formula. Just something to carry. We started this conversation with a feeling. That quiet, unnamed sense that something had shifted. That something had brought you here. That whatever this was, this moment, this video, this particular set of words on this particular day, was not entirely accidental. I hope that by now, that feeling has a little more room to breathe. I hope you've given it a little more permission to be what it is, without immediately reaching for the explanation that makes it smaller. Because here is what I know about the people who find their way back to themselves, back to their faith, back to the thread that connects them to something larger than the daily weight of being alive. They almost never find their way back through certainty. They find their way back through a single moment of honesty. A single moment of stillness. A single moment of being willing to say, quietly, privately, without any audience, I don't have this figured out. I don't know what I believe with the confidence I used to have. But something in me is still listening. Something in me never quite stopped. That something is enough. It has always been enough. You don't need more faith than you have right now. You don't need to resolve the questions that have been with you for years before you're allowed to move forward. You don't need to be further along, more healed, more certain, more anything. You need exactly what you already have. Which is this, a life that has been lived. A heart that has been broken and has kept beating anyway. A capacity for honesty that brought you here today and kept you here through all of it. And somewhere beneath all the noise and the history and the accumulated weight of everything you've carried, a name. Your name. The real one. The one that was whispered. I think about all the moments in a life that seem, at the time, like interruptions. The detours. The losses. The seasons that felt like punishment or abandonment or simply the universe's indifference to your particular suffering. And I think about how differently those moments look from a distance. How what felt like the road ending was actually the road turning. How what felt like silence was actually a different kind of speaking. How what felt like being forgotten was actually being prepared for something that required exactly the person you became in the forgetting. Not everything has a meaning we can access in the moment we need it most. Some things only make sense in retrospect. Some threads only become visible when you've lived long enough to see where they lead. But the thread was always there. Running through the grief and the joy and the ordinary days and the impossible ones. Running through the prayers that felt heard and the ones that felt hollow. Running through the versions of you that you're proud of and the ones you'd rather forget. Running through all of it, steady and unbroken and held by hands that have never once lost their grip. Your name was whispered before you were born. It will be known after you are gone. And in the middle, in this strange, brief, beautiful, difficult middle that we call a life, it is being spoken over you constantly. In the moments you recognize and the ones you don't. In the people who showed up at exactly the right time and the ones who left and somehow that leaving made space for something better. In the dreams you remember and the ones that dissolve by morning but leave a feeling you carry for days. In this moment. Right now. In whatever is happening in the quietest part of you as these words settle. That is not coincidence. That is not your mind manufacturing comfort in the absence of something real. That is real. As real as anything you have ever touched or seen or known. More real, maybe. Because it does not depend on conditions. It does not fluctuate with your mood or your merit or the particular quality of your faith on any given morning. It simply is. And you simply are. And those two things, what is reaching and what is being reached, have always been moving toward each other. You were never lost. You were always being found. And finding, it turns out, looks a lot like this. Like a quiet moment. Like words that landed somewhere unexpected. Like the particular feeling you have right now, in this exact second, that something has shifted. Something small but real. Something you can't quite name but don't want to let go of. Don't let it go. Carry it with you into the rest of this day. Into the ordinary hours that follow this moment. Into the dinner table and the traffic and the inbox and the news and all the noise that will rush back in the moment you close this video. Carry this feeling through all of that. Not loudly. Not as a performance. Just carry it. The way you carry something fragile. Carefully. With both hands. Because what was whispered over you today is worth that kind of care. You are worth that kind of care. And I really think, that some part of you has always known that. Even in the seasons when you forgot. Even in the moments when the evidence seemed to point the other way. Something in you held on to it. Something in you kept the knowing alive, barely sometimes, a single ember in a season of cold, but alive. That ember is what we've been talking about today. That ember is what was whispered. That ember is what no darkness, however long, has ever managed to extinguish. Tend it. That's all. Just tend it. If something in this conversation touched you, if even one moment made you stop and breathe differently, I want to ask you to do something. Share this video with 5 people. Not because I need the numbers. But because you know someone who needs to hear this. You thought of them already, probably more than once while you were listening. Someone who is in the silence right now. Someone who has been running. Someone who forgot that their name was whispered too. Send it to them. Without explanation. Just send it and let it land the way it landed for you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is me asking you, genuinely, not as a script, to subscribe to this channel and come back tomorrow. Because this is a daily practice. And you don't have to do it alone. Leave me a comment. A real one. Not just a word or an emoji. Tell me something true. Tell me what landed. Tell me where you are right now. Tell me what you're carrying. I read them. I think about them. They matter to me more than you know. And tell me, what do you want to talk about next? What question has been living in you that you haven't found the right words for yet? Leave it in the comments and let's find the words together. I'll be here tomorrow. Same time. Same quiet. I'll save you a seat.